Welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to try to tackle human progress
Okay.
and prosperity,
Right.
which is a pretty ambitious topic.
Yeah.
You've shared some excerpts from Matt Ridley's The Rational Optimist.
Right.
And I have to say, even just skimming through this, my brain is already doing backflips.
Well, Ridley, he really kind of flips the script on how we usually think about history.
Okay.
Instead of, focusing on all the things that went wrong, he kind of takes a look at the long view
Yeah.
and argues that things are actually way better than we tend to give them credit for.
Okay, so you're telling me this isn't going to be like a doom and gloom fest?
No.
Because honestly, sometimes it feels like we're on a one-way train to disaster.
Well, Ridley would probably say we need to check our rearview mirror a bit more often.
Okay.
He starts out with this incredible fact. There are nearly 10 billion people on Earth today.
Yeah.
That's a massive population increase.
Huge.
Even from just a few centuries ago, let alone the Stone Age.
Right. But get this. The average person alive today enjoys a higher standard of living than any generation before.
Wow.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Things that we take for granted, like food, clean water, medicine. Even the ability to travel and communicate across continents.
Yeah.
These were unthinkable luxuries for most people throughout history.
I see what you mean about flipping the script.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in the headlines about all the problems we're facing
Right.
that we forget to zoom out and look at the bigger picture.
And to really hammer home the point, Ridley uses a clever example.
Okay.
He breaks down his own morning routine, brushing his teeth, making coffee, reading the news,
Okay.
and highlights how every single activity relies on goods and services from dozens of countries around the world.
Wow.
It's a powerful illustration of just how interconnected and interdependent our world has become thanks to trade.
So are you saying that my morning cup of coffee is like a testament to human progress? That's a pretty uplifting way to start the day.
I like that. But seriously, though, it makes you realize that all this stuff doesn't just magically appear on supermarket shelves.
Right.
It's the result of this complex web of collaboration and exchange that spans the entire globe.
And it's not just coffee beans and smartphones.
Right.
This interconnectedness is a key element in making modern life sustainable.
Okay.
Instead of relying solely on our immediate surroundings for resources,
Yeah.
which can be limited,
Sure.
we can tap into a global network of exchange. Well, of course, no system is perfect,
Right.
but trade has undoubtedly played a massive role in improving the lives of billions of people.
So if trade is like the secret sauce of progress, where did it all begin?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
And Ridley dives deep into the archaeological record to uncover the origins of exchange.
Okay.
He takes us all the way back to the Neanderthals in Europe,
Okay.
roughly 500,000 years ago.
Wow.
They were pretty skilled tool makers,
Okay.
but they were also incredibly self-sufficient. Each individual crafted their own tools. No specialization, no trading.
So no prehistoric Etsy shops for handcrafted flint axes.
Not quite.
Okay.
But interestingly,
Yeah.
around the same time over in Africa, there's evidence of early trade networks starting to pop up.
Really?
Ridley describes this fascinating archaeological find at Boxgrove, England.
Okay.
It's basically a snapshot of a group of early humans sitting together,
Yeah.
each meticulously chipping away at their own hand axe, very much in the Neanderthal style.
So similar skills, but different approaches to how they got things done.
Exactly. And the plot thickens because around 100,000 years ago in Africa, we start seeing signs of long-distance trade.
Wow.
Beads and tools moving across vast distances, connecting different groups of people.
So while Neanderthals were sticking to their solo crafting, early humans in Africa were already forming trade routes.
Yeah.
That's a pretty significant difference.
It is.
I mean, is it possible that this early adoption of trade gave them an advantage?
Ridley definitely thinks so.
Okay.
He argues that this interconnectedness, this willingness to specialize in exchange, led to what he calls collective brains.
Collector brains.
Instead of just relying on individual smarts, these early humans were tapping into a network of knowledge and skills.
Okay.
And that network, constantly exchanging ideas and goods, created a powerful engine for innovation and progress.
So it's like the saying, two heads are better than one.
Right.
But in this case, it's more like thousands of heads spread across a continent.
Exactly.
All contributing to a shared pool of knowledge.
Yeah, it's like the ultimate brainstorming session.
That's a great way to put it.
And to show just how powerful this collective brain can be,
Okay.
Ridley points to a rather sad example. Tasmania,
Okay.
When humans first arrived there, around 40,000 years ago, they had a pretty advanced toolkit.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Ice Age hit, sea levels rose, and Tasmania became isolated.
So they were cut off from the collective brain.
Precisely. And over the next few thousand years, they actually experienced a technological regression.
Wow.
They lost the ability to make certain tools even fire.
Really?
It wasn't a lack of brain power. It was a lack of connection,
Yeah.
a lack of access to that collective pool of knowledge that comes with trade.
That's a powerful reminder that progress isn't just about individual brilliance.
Right.
It's about collaboration, exchange, and the ability to build on the ideas and innovations of others.
For sure.
But let's be real for a second.
Okay.
Trading with people you know and trust is one thing.
Mm.
But what makes people want to trade with complete strangers?
Yeah.
Especially back then. Wouldn't that have been incredibly risky?
You're hitting on a crucial point. The element of trust.
Okay.
Ridley argues that trust is the glue that holds this whole system of exchange together.
Okay.
And it's something that has deep evolutionary roots in humans.
Mm-hmm.
He even used this example of Charles Darwin, who, during his voyages, observed a Phrygian tribesman in South America, bartering fish for a nail.
Okay.
These two individuals with no shared language or cultural background still managed to engage in a mutually beneficial exchange.
So it's like this universal language.
Yeah.
You give me something I value. I give you something you value.
Exactly.
But I mean, is that basic instinct of reciprocity enough to explain like the complex trade networks that have developed over time?
It's definitely part of the equation.
Okay.
But Ridley goes deeper, exploring the biological basis of trust.
Okay.
He talks about oxytocin, often called the trust hormone,
Yeah.
and how it plays a key role in fostering cooperation and empathy, even among strangers.
Wait, so there's a biological basis for trust.
It seems that way.
It's not just the social construct.
And it's not just warm, fuzzy feelings.
Okay.
Ridley brings up this fascinating economic experiment called the ultimatum game.
Okay.
It basically tests how people react to unfair offers in a bargaining situation.
Uh-huh.
And what's interesting is that societies with a longer history of market experience, societies that are more accustomed to trading and engaging in commerce, actually tend to be more generous and fair in their offers.
So engaging in trade might actually make you a better person.
It's an interesting idea.
That's not what I was expecting to learn today.
But it makes sense if you think about it.
Yeah.
If you're constantly interacting with people outside your immediate social circle,
Right.
you need to develop a sense of fairness and trustworthiness.
Yeah.
If you want to keep those trading relationships going.
That makes sense.
And it's exactly Ridley's point.
Okay.
While self-interest is certainly a factor,
Right.
this deep-rooted human capacity for trust is essential in lubricating the wheels of commerce. And as societies evolve, we see that trust gets codified and reinforced in different ways.
Right. We don't just rely on gut feelings or instinct anymore. We have institutions,
Exactly.
laws, contracts,
Yeah.
all these mechanisms that help build trust and minimize risk in the marketplace.
Think about warranties, brand reputations, online review systems. These are all ways of building trust, even when we're dealing with people we've never met before.
Right.
They create a framework that allows trade to flourish on a scale that would have been unimaginable to our ancestors.
So we've established that trade has deep roots in human history.
It does.
And it's driven by this fascinating interplay of self-interest trust and a biological predisposition toward cooperation.
Yeah.
But I think there's still kind of like an elephant in the room.
Okay.
Even today, trade often gets a bad rap. It's portrayed as exploitative, as a system that benefits the rich at the expense of the poor.
Right.
How does Ridley address that criticism?
It's a common perception, and Ridley tackles it head-on.
Okay.
He argues that far from being exploitative, trade actually fosters liberty and well-being.
Okay.
He even connects it to the advancement of social progress.
Now that's a twist.
Yeah.
But how does he back that up?
He uses several compelling examples.
Okay.
Take the influx of women into the workforce during World War II.
Okay.
It was driven by necessity, sure,
Right.
but it led to greater economic independence for women
Yeah.
and ultimately contributed to significant social change.
So an economic shift that ripples out and creates positive social change.
Exactly.
Okay, I can see how that fits into Ridley's overall thesis.
And to further his point,
Okay.
he compares this with countries that experience falling per capita income, like Germany and Japan in the 1930s.
Okay.
What happened?
Yeah.
A rise in dictatorships, a clampdown on individual freedoms.
But the U.S., which remained relatively prosperous during that time, maintained its democratic principles.
Right.
So there seems to be like a correlation between economic well-being and political freedom.
That's what Ridley suggests.
Okay.
He argues that trade, by generating prosperity, creates more opportunities for individuals to express their individuality, pursue their dreams, and contribute to society in meaningful ways.
Okay.
This, in turn, leads to a more dynamic, adaptable, and potentially more democratic society.
So trade isn't just about economics.
Right.
It has profound implications for our social and political lives as well.
Yeah, it's this invisible thread that connects our material well-being to our freedoms and aspirations.
That's a great way to put it.
And to understand how deeply intertwined trade is with the evolution of human societies, we need to go back even further to the dawn of agriculture. Because that's where things get even more interesting.
Now you've got me hooked.
Right.
Agriculture is often presented as this pivotal moment in human history.
Yeah.
The shift from hunting and gathering to settled life.
Right.
But how does trade fit into that narrative?
Ridley challenges the traditional view of agriculture as a sudden revolution.
Okay.
He paints a much more nuanced picture, describing it as a gradual evolution that unfolded over tens of thousands of years.
Wow.
He talks about how early humans slowly moved down the trophic pyramid, meaning they shifted from hunting large animals to relying more on plant-based foods.
Okay, so instead of the classic image of a sudden agricultural revolution, it was more of a gradual shift in how humans source their calories.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And he uses some fascinating archaeological evidence to support this.
Okay.
For example, there's the Ohela II site on the Sea of Galilee, where they've found evidence of wild grain grinding and baking dating back 23,000 years.
Wow.
This suggests that early humans were already experimenting with processing plant foods.
Yeah.
Long before we typically think of agriculture emerging.
So it's like they were slowly laying the groundwork for agriculture without even realizing it.
Precisely.
Okay.
And here's the key point where trade comes in.
Okay.
Ridley argues that trade, rather than being a consequence of agriculture, might have actually been the catalyst for it.
Wait, so you're saying that people weren't trading because they had surplus food from farming?
Right.
They were farming because trade created a demand for specialized food production.
Exactly.
That's pretty mind-blowing.
Think about it. If you're part of a trading network and you see that there's a demand for, say, grains or certain types of fruits, it creates an incentive to specialize in producing those foods.
That totally flips the narrative of how we usually think about the development of agriculture.
It does.
And Ridley points to early cities like Jericho and specialized industries like copper mining and smelting in the Alps as evidence that trade was already well established before the widespread adoption of agriculture. So it's like those early copper miners saw an opportunity. Instead of trying to grow everything they needed in a challenging mountain environment, they focused on what they were good at, mining, and traded their copper for food and other essential goods.
Exactly.
It's like a classic example of specialization driven by trade.
Exactly.
And this brings us to the Ubaid culture in Mesopotamia.
Okay.
One of the earliest civilizations in human history.
Right.
They relied heavily on trade networks for resources like timber and metal. And guess what?
What?
This reliance on trade led to the development of complex social hierarchies, specialized labor, and eventually empires.
Yeah, empires built on trade.
That's not the image that usually comes to mind when I think of ancient empires.
I know.
I always imagine conquest and military might as the driving forces.
It's a common misconception.
Yeah.
But Ridley argues that the earliest empires like the Ubaid culture and the later Uruk expansion, possibly the first true empire, were fundamentally built on the foundations of trade.
Wow.
They needed those trade networks to access resources, to manage their increasingly complex societies, and to maintain their power.
So it's not just about conquering territory. It's about managing resources, building relationships, and creating a system that benefits all parties involved.
Exactly.
It sounds like a much more sophisticated and nuanced view of how empires emerged.
It is.
And within these early empires, a fascinating new class of people emerged.
Okay.
Middlemen.
Middlemen, yes.
these were individuals who made their living not through production or conquest, but through facilitating deals, connecting buyers and sellers, and navigating the complexities of trade.
It's like the original entrepreneurs, spotting opportunities and creating value through exchange.
Exactly.
And this trend continued as civilizations evolved.
Okay.
Think about the ancient Greek city-states like Athens and Miletus.
Yeah.
They were fueled by the exchange of goods across the Mediterranean.
Right.
And this trade not only brought wealth, but also facilitated an incredible exchange of ideas and cultural innovations.
It's hard to imagine the flourishing of philosophy, science, and art in ancient Greece without those vibrant trade routes connecting different cultures and ideas.
Yeah, and this pattern continued through history.
Okay.
Look at the Italian city-states during the medieval period.
Okay.
Places like Genoa, Lucca, Florence, and Venice, each specialized in different industries, from banking to textiles. And they thrived on sophisticated trade networks that spanned the globe.
So it's not just about bartering beads and tools anymore. It's about complex financial instruments, international trade routes, and the exchange of knowledge and ideas on a global scale.
Exactly. And while empires and governments can play a role in creating the conditions for trade to flourish, Ridley argues that they often end up hindering it.
So it's a double-edged sword.
In a way, governments can provide stability infrastructure and legal frameworks that support trade.
Yeah.
But over time, they tend to become more bureaucratic, more focused on control and extraction, which can stifle innovation and limit economic growth.
So it's a delicate balance between having the right amount of government support for trade without letting it become a burden.
Exactly.
And this brings us to one of the most pivotal periods in human history, the Industrial Revolution.
A period of immense change, both positive and negative.
For sure. How does Ridley fit the Industrial Revolution into this narrative of trade and innovation?
He sees the Industrial Revolution as a game changer.
Okay.
And he argues that its success was driven by two key factors: coal and access to resources from the Americas.
Oh.
Coal provided a cheap and abundant source of energy, while the discovery of the New World opened up new markets and new sources of raw materials.
It's fascinating to think about how these seemingly unrelated events, the discovery of a continent and the harnessing of a new energy source, combined to create the conditions for such a profound shift in human history.
It really highlights how interconnected our world is, even across vast distances and timescales.
Yeah.
And one of the most striking points that Ridley makes is that the Industrial Revolution, despite its many challenges, actually led to significant improvements in living standards for the vast majority of people.
But wait, wasn't the Industrial Revolution also a time of terrible working conditions, child labor, and widespread pollution? How does that square with the idea of progress?
It's a valid point. And Ridley doesn't shy away from the negative consequences of industrialization. But he argues that many of those problems, like child labor and urban pollution, actually existed before the Industrial Revolution.
Really?
They were even worse in pre-industrial societies.
So it's not that factories and mass production created these problems. It's that industrialization eventually provided the means to address them.
Exactly.
Okay.
As societies became wealthier and more technologically advanced, they were able to invest in things like sanitation, public health, and education, which eventually led to improvements in working conditions and a decline in child labor.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always linear or immediate. Sometimes things get worse before they get better. But the key is to keep innovating, keep striving for solutions. And to use our newfound wealth and knowledge to address the challenges that arise along the way.
Precisely. And for Ridley, the driving force behind all of this is the human capacity for innovation. Particularly in the realm of energy.
Energy really is the foundation of everything, isn't it?
It is.
It powers our homes, our industries, our transportation systems. It's essential for pretty much everything we do.
Exactly. And Ridley traces the evolution of energy use. From the early days of relying on wood and animal power to the harnessing of coal, oil, and electricity. Each of these transitions unlocked new possibilities, leading to greater efficiency, productivity, and ultimately improvements in human well-being.
But now we're facing a new energy challenge.
We are.
The need to transition away from fossil fuels and find cleaner, more sustainable sources of energy.
Right.
And that's a topic that often feels pretty daunting, to say the least.
It is a massive challenge.
Yeah.
And one that Ridley devotes a considerable portion of his book to.
Okay.
But he doesn't approach it with a sense of doom and gloom.
Okay.
In fact, he sees it as an opportunity for even greater innovation and progress.
So instead of fearing the future, he's embracing the challenge.
Exactly. And this brings us to one of the most crucial questions of our time.
Okay.
What does the future hold for human progress and prosperity?
That's a big one.
It is.
But after this deep dive into the past, I'm feeling a lot more optimistic about our ability to navigate the challenges ahead.
Yeah.
So we've just established that energy is pretty much the bedrock of human progress, and now we're at this crucial turning point where we need to rethink how we power our world.
Yeah.
But honestly, I often get stuck in a spiral of worry when I think about climate change and our reliance on fossil fuels.
Right.
It feels like we're hooked on something we know is bad for us, but we just can't seem to kick the habit.
It's a really apt analogy.
Yeah.
And Ridley doesn't shy away from the complex role that fossil fuels have played in human history.
Okay.
He acknowledges that they've been essential in driving progress. Think about it. Before we figured out how to harness the energy stored in coal, oil, and gas, our options were pretty limited.
Right.
We were burning wood, relying on animal power.
Yeah.
And those methods were incredibly inefficient.
It's like we were stuck in low power mode.
Yeah.
Struggling to meet our basic needs.
Right.
Let alone achieve anything beyond that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Ridley even makes this intriguing argument.
Okay.
That fossil fuels, in a way, spared much of the landscape from industrialization.
Okay.
Without coal, oil, and gas, we would have had to chop down vast forests for fuel.
Yeah.
And convert even more land to agriculture.
Right.
Just to keep up with our energy demands.
So, in a strange way, fossil fuels allowed us to industrialize without completely denuding the planet.
That's the argument.
Wow.
But of course, we can't keep burning fossil fuels indefinitely.
Right.
We all know the consequences, climate change being the most pressing.
For sure.
So the question becomes, what's the alternative?
Right.
And where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question that everyone's grappling with.
It is.
What's Ridley's take on this energy dilemma?
He doesn't advocate for any one specific energy source.
Okay.
Instead, he's a champion for relentless innovation and exploration of all options.
Okay, so he's talking about pushing the boundaries of science and technology.
Yes.
Everything from advanced solar and wind technologies to nuclear power and even more radical concepts like fusion power.
Exactly.
So instead of getting bogged down in debates about which renewable source is best, he's saying we need to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks.
Exactly. He has this unshakable faith in human ingenuity.
Okay.
And believes that if we create the right conditions, incentives, competitions, a culture of experimentation, we'll come up with solutions that we can't even imagine today.
It's like those sci-fi movies where they have these incredible futuristic energy sources that seem impossible now, but maybe someday.
That's the spirit. Ridley points to the incredible progress we've made in fields like computing and telecommunications just a few decades ago. Having a powerful computer in your pocket or being able to video chat with someone across the globe.
Yeah.
Or does it seem like science fiction?
Totally.
Now it's just part of everyday life.
So if we can achieve those kinds of technological leaps, surely we can crack the energy code as well.
Right.
But what about the argument that renewable energy sources like wind and solar are just too expensive? That always seems to be the sticking point.
Ridley acknowledges that cost is a major barrier.
Okay.
And he's actually quite critical of the current state of renewable energy.
Really?
He points out that many forms like wind power are heavily reliant on government subsidies.
Okay.
And haven't lived up to their promises of becoming truly cost competitive.
So he's not saying renewables are bad.
No.
But rather that we need to rethink how we're implementing them.
Exactly. He's all about making renewables truly viable in the marketplace.
Okay.
Not just propping them up with artificial support.
Got it.
He thinks that a combination of technological breakthroughs, fierce market competition, and a shift away from those subsidies is the path towards making renewables a genuine alternative to fossil fuels.
Okay, so that's the renewables angle.
Yeah.
But I remember him also being quite vocal about another energy source that's often considered controversial, nuclear power.
He's definitely a proponent of nuclear power.
Okay.
He sees it as a safe, reliable, and low-carbon energy source that has been unfairly demonized, often for political reasons.
That's a debate that's been raging for decades.
It has.
And it's probably not one we can settle here.
Right.
But it's refreshing to hear someone challenge the prevailing narrative, especially on such a complex and emotionally charged issue.
That's one of the things I appreciate about Ridley.
Okay.
He's not afraid to go against the grain.
Yeah.
And he encourages readers to critically examine the evidence, whether it's about climate change energy or any other major challenge.
Speaking of major challenges, let's talk about another one that's often framed as an existential threat: population growth.
Okay.
I think it's a concern that a lot of people share.
Right.
More people means more demand for resources, more pressure on the environment, and potentially more conflict.
It's a common worry.
Yeah.
And it's deeply rooted in that Malthusian idea that we're on a collision course with the limits of our planet.
Right.
But guess what?
Right.
Ridley pushes back against this doom and gloom scenario as well.
Okay.
He argues that population growth is actually a symptom of progress,
Okay.
not the root cause of our problems.
Now, that really is a mind-bending perspective shift.
It is.
Help me understand this.
Sure.
How can more people be a sign of progress?
Yeah.
Isn't it the opposite?
Think about it this way.
Okay.
As societies become wealthier and healthier, infant mortality rates plummet. Life expectancy increases, and people tend to have fewer children.
Okay.
It's the classic demographic transition that we've seen play out in many developed countries.
So as living standards improve, birth rates naturally decline.
Exactly.
It makes sense, but it's definitely not the narrative we usually hear.
And Ridley backs this up with data, showing that birth rates have been falling globally for decades. In many developed countries, populations are actually shrinking.
Wow.
Or on the verge of shrinking.
So the population bomb might be more of a population fizzle?
That's what the data suggests.
Okay, but what about the billions of people in developing countries who are still striving for a better life?
Right.
Isn't their growing consumption going to put a strain on resources?
It's a valid concern.
Yeah.
But Ridley argues that as people in developing countries become more prosperous, they also tend to invest in education, healthcare, and environmental protection.
Okay.
They become more conscious of their impact on the planet and more willing to adopt sustainable practices.
So he's saying it's not just about richer people consuming more, it's about them consuming differently.
Exactly. He argues that economic growth, coupled with technological innovation, can lead to a more efficient use of resources and a smaller environmental footprint.
Okay.
It's about decoupling economic growth from environmental damage.
So it's not a zero-sum game
Right.
between human well-being and the health of the planet.
Exactly.
That's a hopeful thought.
It is.
But I have to ask, is it realistic?
Sure.
Isn't there a limit to how much we can innovate our way out of these challenges? What about the idea that we're bumping up against the carrying capacity of the Earth?
Those are legitimate questions.
Yeah.
And Ridley acknowledges that there are limits.
Okay.
But he also reminds us that throughout history, we've consistently underestimated the power of human ingenuity to find solutions.
Right.
We need to be careful about imposing artificial limits on what's possible.
It's like that saying, necessity is the mother of invention. The more pressing the challenge, the more creative we become in finding solutions.
Exactly. And we also need to remember that the Earth isn't a static, unchanging entity.
Okay.
It's a dynamic system.
Right.
We're constantly discovering new resources, developing new technologies, and finding new ways to adapt to changing conditions.
So instead of viewing the Earth as a finite pie that we're all fighting over, we should see it as a constantly evolving system. With the potential for growth and renewal.
Exactly. For Ridley, our ability to innovate and adapt is the ultimate resource.
Okay.
And it's one that so far has shown no signs of depletion.
It's a powerful message that our capacity for creative problem solving is our greatest asset.
It is.
But it's not a call to complacency, right? We can't just sit back and assume that technology will magically solve all our problems.
Absolutely not. Ridley emphasizes that we need to create the right conditions for innovation to flourish. That means fostering a culture of experimentation and risk-taking, promoting free trade and competition, and being wary of excessive regulation that can stifle progress.
So it's about finding that sweet spot.
Yeah.
Between individual initiative, the dynamism of the market, and smart, targeted regulations that promote innovation without being overly burdensome.
Precisely. Ridley's book is ultimately a celebration of that unique human capacity for innovation and adaptation. It's a reminder that we've overcome immense challenges in the past. And with the right mindset, we can continue to make progress and build a better future.
It's a much-needed dose of optimism.
It is.
Especially in a world that often feels consumed by negativity and fear. But I have to ask, amidst all this talk of progress and potential, does Ridley ever address the darker side of human nature? What about greed conflict? The potential for those very things to derail our progress?
That's a great question. And one that we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dives. Into the Rational Optimist.
All right.
It's true that Ridley focuses heavily on the positive aspects of human nature. Our capacity for cooperation, innovation, and problem solving. But he doesn't shy away from the fact that we're complex creatures. Capable of both great and terrible things.
So how do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory aspects of human nature? The drive to create and the potential to destroy.
That's the challenge. And Ridley offers some insightful perspectives. On how we can harness our better angels while guarding against our darker impulses. But for that, we'll need to shift gears and delve into the final part of our exploration.
All right. Okay, so we've journeyed through the history of human progress, explored the challenges we face today, and even dipped our toes into the potential of the future. But I'm still curious about that last question we touched on. How does Ridley reconcile his optimistic view of human progress with the undeniable fact that we're also capable of some pretty destructive behavior?
It's the age-old question, isn't it? Are humans inherently good or inherently bad? Ridley doesn't offer a simplistic answer. But he does provide a framework for thinking about this duality of human nature. He argues that our capacity for both creation and destruction stems from the same source. Our incredible ability to cooperate. To organize ourselves into complex societies and to wield powerful technologies.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
It is.
The very qualities that allow us to build amazing things can also be turned towards destructive ends.
Exactly. And think about the development of nuclear weapons. It was a triumph of scientific ingenuity. But it also unleashed a terrifying new threat to humanity.
For sure.
The same could be said for many other technologies. From the internet to artificial intelligence. They hold incredible potential for good. But also the possibility for misuse and harm.
So how do we navigate this inherent tension in human nature?
That's a tough one.
How do we ensure that our creative impulses outweigh our destructive tendencies?
For Ridley, the answer lies in fostering the right kind of social and political institutions. He argues that systems that promote individual liberty, free markets, and open exchange tend to channel human energy towards constructive ends.
So it's about creating a system where cooperation and innovation are rewarded? While greed and aggression are kept in check.
Precisely, he points to historical examples. Where societies that embraced free trade and individual liberty flourished. While those that were more closed and authoritarian stagnated. Or even collapsed.
It's fascinating to think about how the structure of our societies can actually shape our behavior, either bringing out the best or the worst in us. But what about those very real threats we face today? Like climate change. Is Ridley really optimistic that we can overcome something that feels so massive and complex?
He believes we can. But he stresses that it will require a different approach. From what we've seen so far. He's critical of top-down centralized solutions, like the Kyoto Protocol, which he argues have been largely ineffective and often counterproductive. He thinks they stifle innovation and create perverse incentives.
So instead of big government programs and international agreements, what does he propose?
He advocates for a more decentralized, market-based approach. That focuses on innovation and adaptation. He sees a role for government in setting clear goals and providing incentives. But he believes that the real solutions will come from the private sector, driven by competition and the pursuit of profit.
So it's about unleashing the power of the market to drive innovation in clean technologies and sustainable practices.
Exactly. He points to the potential of new technologies, like carbon capture and storage geoengineering.
Yeah.
And advanced nuclear power as possible ways to mitigate climate change. He also emphasizes the importance of adaptation, preparing for the impacts that are already happening.
Right.
And will continue to happen regardless of what we do to reduce emissions.
So it's not just about preventing climate change. It's about learning to live with it and finding ways to thrive in a changing world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He argues that this approach is not only more effective, but also more aligned with the principles of a free and open society. It's about empowering individuals and communities to find their own solutions, rather than relying on centralized bureaucracies.
It's a very different perspective from what we often hear from politicians and activists.
It is.
But it's refreshing to consider an alternative that focuses on human ingenuity and resilience, rather than just top-down control.
And Ridley takes it even further. He argues that the biggest threat to continued progress might not be resource scarcity, environmental collapse, or even some unforeseen catastrophe. He suggests that the real danger is our own pessimism.
That's a thought-provoking idea.
It is.
How can pessimism hold us back?
Yeah.
Isn't it just a realistic assessment of the challenges we face?
To a certain extent, yes. But Ridley argues that if we become too focused on the negative, if we believe that the future is doomed, it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We might stop investing in innovation, stop taking risks, and stop looking for solutions.
It's like giving up before we even start.
Right.
If we believe we're powerless to change things, then we become powerless.
Exactly. He's not advocating for blind optimism or ignoring the problems. Instead, he proposes a more nuanced perspective. What he calls rational optimism.
So what does rational optimism look like in practice?
It's about acknowledging the challenges we face, being honest about the risks, but also recognizing our incredible capacity for innovation and adaptation. It's about looking at history and seeing how time and again humans have faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles and emerged stronger, more resilient, and more prosperous.
It's about learning from the past and applying those lessons to the challenges of the present and the future.
Precisely. And it's about fostering a culture that encourages risk-taking experimentation and a willingness to challenge the status quo. Those are the ingredients that drive progress, according to Ridley.
So ultimately, it's about shifting our mindset.
It is.
Moving away from fear and helplessness and embracing a more optimistic problem-solving approach. It's about believing in our ability to shape our own destiny.
Exactly. And the Rational Optimist offers a powerful framework for thinking about the choices and actions that will determine that destiny. It challenges us to think critically, to question conventional wisdom, and to believe in the power of human ingenuity to create a better future.
Well, I have to say this deep dive into the Rational Optimist has been an eye-opening experience. It's given me a whole new perspective on human progress and the challenges and possibilities that lie ahead. If there's one key takeaway, it's that our greatest asset is our ability to innovate, to adapt, and to cooperate.
I couldn't agree more. It's a message that's both inspiring and empowering.
It is.
It reminds us that we're not passive bystanders in the face of global challenges, but active participants in shaping our collective future.
So to our listener, we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas.
Please do.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop believing in the power of human ingenuity to solve problems and create a better world.
Absolutely.
Who knows what incredible breakthroughs and transformative changes lie just around the corner?
The future is full of possibilities. And if history is any guide, the most exciting chapters are yet to be written.
I love that.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been great having you.
Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep striving for a better future.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.